In this video, we're going to introduce a tool that has been integrated into Visual Studio.net called Crystal Reports. Crystal Reports is a report writer. It allows you to easily and quickly take data from various sources, from SQL Server, from XML, from Access databases, from Excel spreadsheets, or whatever data source that you can find. It can bring those in and allow you to create a visual representation of the data in a very user-friendly format that can be printed, converted to a PDF file, can be sent as HTML to an end user, and it allows the user also to be able to customize the report if you want to enable that functionality. And this can be used again in a Windows form application or a web form application. And as I've listed here in a couple points down, that it can be used in a web services application. In other words, all of the data that's generated on your report can be exposed as a web service to any application that can understand XML. And we'll talk about why you'd want to do that in just a moment. But basically, Crystal Reports is a very flexible, very powerful tool. Its flexibility can be seen whenever you start to use the object model that allows you to add and remove elements from your report programmatically. Also allows you to capture events that might have been fired by the end user on the various reporting interface elements. But more than likely what you'll start out doing is using some of the visual tools, such as there are a number of different experts that walk you through the process of creating the reports, formatting the reports, doing different summaries and groupings of the report data and so forth. And then also there's a report designer that allows you to get a little bit more fidelity of control over the various elements and where they're placed within the report itself. As we noted that Crystal Reports can support various different interfaces. They have tools that can be used in WinForms and web forms, and also in web services. Now you might be asking yourself, first of all, why do we even need Crystal Reports? I mean, after all, don't I have the ability to grab data into a web page and display it in a data grid? And that's very true. It's you can use that approach for simple types of applications, but whenever you get into more grouping and categorizing and even searching, you got to build a lot of that functionality yourself. Crystal Reports gives you that pretty much out of the box without having to do a lot of configuration. So that explains why you would use it in a WinForms or web forms application. The next question is, why would you use Crystal Reports to grab data out of your database and then present that data as web services when you can do that so easily with ASP.NET Web Services? And I would tend to agree with you. The answer that I would give is that if you have a lot of legacy Crystal reports hanging around your organization and you wanted to upgrade them to and be able to offer the data that they pull together as a web service, and present it in a different way, or present it to any of your partners or end users for their integration to their applications. This would be one way to be able to migrate some of that legacy code or legacy reports that you've spent a lot of hours creating in the past, and be able to utilize it in a different kind of way. So I see the web services as a way of bridging maybe old things that belong to your corporation, old reports, and being able to kind of modernize them and give them an XML interface so they can be consumed by different types of applications outside your enterprise. Of course, I'm sure Crystal Decisions probably has a different take on that, but that would be my impression of your architecture needs for Crystal Reports web services. There are a couple of downsides to using Crystal Reports from Visual Studio.net perspective, and that would be, first of all, that it requires registration. No, you don't have to pay anything. It is integrated into Visual Studio.net, but as we'll see in just a moment, you'll be kind of nagged into providing some registration information just so they can market to you a little bit more. And then also, probably the biggest restriction is that it only allows 5 concurrent users for the Visual Studio.net edition of Crystal Reports. So in other words, only 5 people can look at your report at the same time. If you need your department or your entire company to view a series of reports, you need more than 5 concurrent users, then you're going to have to buy some of their server products that are pretty expensive. Regardless of whether you're building a WinForms or WebForm application, the basic flow of creating and integrating Cursor reports into your application is just about the same. The first thing that you'll do once you create a new project is that you will add a report viewer control onto the form, whether it's a web form or a WinForm. And the report viewer control basically is the interface that accepts a report file that we'll get to in just a moment and is able to display it and give the end user some tools that they can interact with that report with. For example, they'll be able to zoom in, they'll be able to print, they'll be able to navigate through it, they'll be able to search for certain words or pages. So the report viewer is just like a web browser in a sense, in so much that it's just the interface into the actual report. It's not the report itself. The second step is to add and configure a data set to the project. Now let me preface this by saying that there's a lot of different ways to get data into Cursor reports. However, we're going to take a very .NET approach and use data sets in order to accomplish this. As you'll see in just a moment, you'll have the option to select an RDO object, an ADO object, an access database, a lot of different options. But we're going to take, again, the data set approach to building these reports and populating them with data from our data source. The third step is to add and configure a report item to the project. You can add as many reports as you want to. These are just simply RPT files. And the RPT file will have a definition of what fields will be in what position, and the way that you do that initially is you walk through an expert that says, okay, which data set do you want to use, what tables do you want to use from that data set, what fields do you want to use from that table, how do you want to arrange them, what do you want the report to look like, how do you want the report items to be grouped together by date or by some other type of filter. So there's a lot of questions that are asked throughout the process, and it really does automate nicely the whole creation of the report, and then you go in and tweak it in the actual report designer. And then the last step is to data bind the data set to the data source, just like you would in any other .NET application. And then what you do is bind the report to that data set. So whatever the data set that has data is, you need to set the report to it and then send it out to the report viewer. And we'll just have an example of this in just a moment. Originally, I had no plans to really talk about Cursor reports because I'm not really a big fan of it. However, it's one of the most requested topics on LearnVisualStudio.net, so I decided to go ahead and at least discuss it. But I want to throw in some reasons why I personally don't like it. The first reason is that it really encourages too many business rules and too much business knowledge into the presentation tier. I have a very strict way of looking at application architecture where you shouldn't have business rules and calculations and formulas and so forth really tied up in the presentation tier. That should be taken care of in your classes that actually know how to grab data out of the database, how to format it, or if there's any business rules, they should be encapsulated there so that they can be reused by a number of different interfaces throughout your enterprise. And it just allows some more flexibility so that if something changes, you don't have to change it in 10 spots. You just basically update it in one spot, and then all the reports or all the web or Win interfaces that pull from that control, they don't have to be updated because all the business logic has been encapsulated in one spot. And we'll talk about architecture in a whole different series, but I really don't think it's a good idea, as they've suggested, to really tie up a lot of the business rules and things inside of your reports. Then you're tied into using the web services like we talked about in the first slide in order to grab that data out, and I don't think that's a really good spot for that. So just from an architecture standpoint, I'm not really comfortable with the model that they encourage you to use. The second part of this is that I like having the control and flexibility of the framework. Very few times have my users come back and said that they want to be able to zoom in or they want to be able to sort or filter in ways that I can't do with the data grid. So I prefer to have the bare bones framework whenever I'm doing application development in .NET, and I don't like to use a lot of third-party tools that tie my organization to purchasing um, servers or anything along those lines, server software that's expensive. That kind of makes me look bad. Unless I had buy-in from the top, I don't think I would use and introduce Crystal Reports into my to the company I work for. And then the final thing that I'd like to suggest is that there are some rumors in regards to what is coming down the pipe from Microsoft themselves, that they're not really pleased with this whole licensing strategy that Crystal Reports has, and that they're planning on building your own tool. Now, I don't know if that's the truth or not. Again, I heard this on the message board, so you can take it with a grain of salt. But it makes sense to me that if you are going to have a need for a reporting tool, then Microsoft should be the one supporting that and should be integrating it into the tool itself. And then if anybody wants to go and extend that, great. But at least you have a common foundation so that you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to bring reports within your organization. So at any rate, that's kind of my reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Crystal Reports. I think it does a lot of good things, and it does what it does do very well, and it gives a lot of flexibility. I'm just not comfortable using it, but I will go through it for the purpose of training you on how to use it if that's something you choose to do within your organization. So I'm going to begin by creating a new project, and just as a quick brief walkthrough to show you the basic steps of creating and adding a report to your project, I'm going to create a ASP.NET Web Forms application, and I'm going to just call this Crystal Web. Click OK. And currently I have simply a web form. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my web forms section of my toolbox and go ahead and drag over a Crystal Report Viewer. And we'll just place this here on the form. Go ahead and hit save. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Add New Item to my project. The Add New Item dialog pops open. I'm going to go down to Utility and select Crystal Report. I'm going to go ahead and leave it the default name for now. Click Open. Now you'll notice when I do that the Crystal Decisions registration wizard opens. You get to use Crystal Reports in Visual Studio.NET. I think it is 30 times. I think I heard. I never hit that, but I purposely didn't register it so that we could walk through it together. You can select register later, but again, when you hit your 30th time, I think it forces you, but I've never got to that point yet. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next and register by the web. Click Next. I'm going to put in my name. Select United States. And put Scott at learnvisualstudio.net. Now, I'll probably regret having used my real email address for reasons that you'll probably find out whenever you do this, but oh well, here we go. I'm going to click Next. It opens up a web browser that has a secure connection to Crystal Decisions. I'm going to go ahead and resize the web browser so you can kind of see what I've got here. It's going to ask me for a whole profile, so I'm going to go ahead and put Scott at learnvisualstudio.net, and I'll put in a password. And see here, I get in all this. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this while I figure this part out. Okay, after about 3 attempts, I finally found a password combination that works, so we're going to continue on. Now it asks for the full product registration information. So I'm going to take a few minutes and fill this in, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of how to do this, but be prepared for a few minutes of agony as you populate all of this information that they're looking for. So after I filled in all that information, basically it says that it's going to send you the registration information to your email. I already checked my email and was able to find it. Um, please don't use mine. I don't want to get in trouble. And so we're going to type that in. And after pasting it all in, I hit finish, and hopefully that box won't come up anymore. But now we're presented with the Crystal Report Gallery, and from here we will make some selections initially about what type of report we want to create. And I'm going to create a very simple kind of report. Unfortunately, I didn't do this necessarily in the right order, which is a good opportunity for me to just go ahead and cancel this and close this report down. And what I want to do is go ahead and create a connection to my database. And so I'm going to go to the pubs database that comes with SQL Server. And I'm going to grab over, let's pull over sales. I think that's a good one. Okay, so this should be nothing new to you if you've watched other videos about configuring data adapters. I'm going to make this very simple. Just going to walk through it real quick. Use SQL statements. That's great. Looks excellent. Hit finish. Generates everything. And now I'm going to go ahead and generate a data set from the data adapter. And sales looks great. We could combine tables and everything. We're just going to make it very simple for this first time through. Okay. So that's what we've done. We've created now an instance of our data set on our web form. The next thing we're going to do is go back to and open up Crystal Report 1.rpt. You'll notice that there's two parts of the screen. We have a Field Explorer on the left-hand side that is part of has an affinity to the right-hand side of the screen. So if we were to unpin it, it would go over there with the rest of our windows. And basically the Field Explorer allows us to drag and drop items and place them onto our report. And that would include things like database fields from our data connection. Then we're able to create formulas as well, and there's a formula expert that allows you to add columns together and perform financial and scientific calculations on those fields. Also to be able to request parameters so you can limit the scope of a report and say I only want to see dates between the 1st and the 5th and so on. So there's a lot of different things you can do from the Field Explorer. But what we need to do is just go ahead and right click and select database, select report and go to Report Expert. It'll say if you do this, then every change that you made up to this point on your report will be overwritten, and that's fine. So that brings us to the Create Report Expert. It allows us to drill down through, in this case, the current data sets within our project. We're going to go ahead and select this one, and we can even see what it has. So we're going to select this table and insert table into our report and select the next button. It allows us to select the all the columns if we want to, or just certain ones. It allows us to even create formulas and even find fields within our data set if we want to do that. We're going to keep this very simple. We can rename each of the columns here and give them a friendly name here in the column heading. So each time here we can type in quantity instead. And select next. And so now it wants to know if we want to group by certain fields. And so like, for example, we can take the order date and go ahead and add that over here and then select in what order we want to sort things. We'll sort in descending order. So the most recent date will be at the top of our report, and we can create breaks for each day or each week. And based on those, we're going to see different aggregates potentially at the bottom. We'll keep it for each day. Now it wants to know what type of aggregations we want to see, and certainly we want to see the quantity summed up, but we can pick average and any other number of different fields and even get percentages of and things of that nature. Let's go ahead and hit next. It asks us for a title. our reports, and then it allows us to look at the different styles of reports that it could create. And we're going to go ahead and select this blue-red border report. And that's all we need to do. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And now it's going to take its first pass at creating that report for us. So over here in the Report Designer, you can see that it has different sections. There's a report header which will show up only on the first page of a printed report. And then the page header, which will show up on the top of every page of the report. A group header is what is sections off groups of data. So for example, we made a group of dates. So each group, for example, 8-1, 8-2, 8-3, those would all be groups, August 3rd, August 2nd, August 1st. And then all of the orders that came in for each of those days would be listed under that particular date. And then we can have a group footer, which would allow us to sum up for a particular day and get averages and stuff pertinent to that particular group. In this case, it would be a day. And then as we scroll down, we can see the report footer. So at the very end of the report, what is the grand total? And then the page footer at the very bottom of every page, which we see a red line. Now, we can modify this by, for example, adding a report header. I can right-click in this area and select a text object, and we'll just drag and drop that here and put this is confidential info. And then click outside here and drag it out so you can see the whole thing. These little lines, little slashes, mean that we have suppressed this section by default. Well, I'm going to right-click on the actual report header bar, and I'm going to select Don't Suppress. So now it should print that out as well. So the next thing that we need to do now that we've created our report and we've modified it, for example, I can also change something around. Let's move this store ID header section over here and the accompanying field itself. So did you notice what I did? There's actually two fields that I changed. This is the actual textual column header, but this is where the actual data will be presented. So in the detail section is going to have the actual data we pull from our database. This is just a pretty column header. So after we've made some modifications to our report and we save those, the next thing that we need to do is to go into code and add some information to our code behind of our web form. So the first thing that we'll want to do is go ahead here and create an instance of our Crystal report. So Crystal report 1. So that gives us a public instance to work with. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add some code to the page load event. And so I'm going to, first of all, fill our data adapter. So we're going to go SQL data adapter 1.fill datasets. Reference sales is our table, I believe, that we used. So now we have a populated data set. The sales table has been populated with basically a select star from sales in the pub's database. The next thing we need to do is set the Crystal Reports viewer, so and tell it what report that we want to use. So we're going to get our reference to our Crystal Report viewer, and then we're going to select a report source, and then we're going to set that equal to the instance of our report object. And then we're going to take our report object and finally bind that by selecting set data source, and then we're going to pass in our data set. And those are the three lines of code that we need to write. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Start button, and we're going to test and make sure that this worked. Great. Here, let me pull this over so you can see a little bit better. Okay. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see it much better than that. Okay. So since we created a grouping for our application, there is kind of this left-hand side area that allows us to select specific dates and have them appear in the right-hand side. But the majority of our report is right here on the right-hand side of the screen, and it goes off to the right-hand side. But this has all the fields that we pulled. Notice here that even though we typed in the word quantity, we changed the title for that. It doesn't appear. That's because we didn't make the field big enough. But notice some of the features of our report. First of all, it is segregated by date, and that, as you'll notice, that this is the group header, and this is the group footer, and inside the group footer we had a sum of the quantities. So look how easy that was. And again, this is what leads me to believe that, yeah, if you had a quick need for some reporting, Cursor Reports really is the way to go. Look how quick and easy that was to generate it. Also, we can scroll through the pages of the report with this handy little tool here. I can type in, if there's like dozens of pages, I can type in a page and select to go there. You can also search for certain keywords and then also change the magnification of the report. So we have a lot of options here. It's a very powerful tool. Let's go back over here to the right-hand side and select like 311, for example. And so it'll bring up that page of the report that has 311 on it. I think we may have already been on that page. But at any rate, with very few lines of code and with just a few clicks of the mouse through an expert guide, we were able to create a pretty full-feature reporting system. So that's pretty much it for this first video on Cursor Reports. There's a lot to look into. So in future videos, we're going to cover pretty much the gambit of the functionality that comes with Visual Studio.net's version of Cursor Reports. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.